Was it self-defense or just two rich kids who got greedy? Hey everyone, it's Lucky with Unfiltered Lucky. And today I want to talk about Eric and Lyle Menendez, the Menendez Brothers. Now this crime is over 35 years old, but there's been some movement in this case. And it's very possible that Eric and Lyle Menendez could be going home. So today, I want to talk about the crimes that they committed, as well as the reason that after 35 years in the California prison system, they might be getting out. On August 20th of 1989, Eric and Lyle Menendez, two brothers, ages 18 and 21 at the time, walked into the den of their parents' Beverly Hills mansion as their parents were watching television. Eric and Lyle were both carrying shotguns, and they opened fire on their dad, Jose Menendez, and their mom, Kitty Menendez. Jose Menendez was hit 6 times, including one at close range to the back of his head. Kitty Menendez was hit 10 times, including one at close range to her face. So this was a very brutal crime. And it was also planned out days ahead of time by the Menendez brothers. On August the 18th, Eric and Lyle Menendez were trying to buy handguns. Because of a discrepancy with their California ID, they were unable to buy these firearms. So they each decided to purchase a shotgun. In addition, they borrowed one of their friends' IDs to buy ammunition from a local sporting goods store. So these crimes were planned out by Eric and Lyle, and this is when they began to put their plan in motion. Only a few days later, on August the 20th, Eric and Lyle Menendez caught their mom and dad by surprise as they watched TV in the family den. Eric and Lyle opened fire on their mom and dad and continued firing their weapons. There were a lot of rounds fired, and it's been said that Eric and Lyle continued to go out to their car, grab more ammunition, reload, and come in firing. So there were a lot of rounds that were fired in this crime. And because of that, Eric and Lyle Menendez believed that law enforcement would be showing up any second. So they waited. They had a plan. They had a story that they were going to tell police when they got there. But no one ever came. So what Eric and Lyle did was they decided to get rid of the clothing that they were wearing and also ditch the firearms. They buried the firearms next to the road on Mulholland Drive, and they went to the movie theater. They were going to buy movie tickets to see Batman, but when they purchased the tickets, they realized that the ticket stubs were time-stamped, so that wasn't going to work for an alibi. So then what they did was they went to a county fair, and they walked around. They wanted to be seen by as many people as possible in order to create an alibi. When they returned home to their Beverly Hills mansion, it was silent. No one was there. There was no law enforcement. None of the neighbors had come over to see what the noise was. So what Eric and Lyle decided to do was call 911 themselves. They called 911 and let the 911 operator know that their mom and dad had been attacked and that they had just returned home and found them. Now, when law enforcement arrives, Eric and Lyle tell law enforcement that they believe that this could be some sort of retaliation, some sort of revenge for their dad's job. They were basically telling law enforcement that they believed that this was a possible mafia hit. See, Jose Menendez, Eric and Lyle's dad, was a very powerful record executive with RCA Records. So he was well known in Southern California. People knew who Jose Menendez was. And there were some questionable actions that he had made throughout his business career. So law enforcement thought that maybe it was a possibility that this was someone exacting revenge on the Menendez family. Investigators didn't suspect Eric and Lyle. They never even tested their hands for residue. They basically questioned them, and then Eric and Lyle went on with their lives. They had both received very hefty inheritances. Their family was rich. Their dad was a very wealthy record executive, so they had a lot of money. Eric and Lyle began spending money like crazy. They went on lavish trips in and out of the country. They were buying properties and they were buying businesses. And eventually, this is how they came back on law enforcement's radar. Law enforcement thought that it was suspicious that Eric and Lyle Menendez were going on all these vacations and buying all these things right after their mom and dad had just brutally lost their lives. So investigators began looking back into Eric and Lyle. Now, the family didn't think that this was odd at all. Eric and Lyle had grown up rich, so they didn't think it was strange in any way that they were out spending money like crazy. They said that this was the lifestyle that they lived. Their parents were wealthy, they spent a lot of money on these kids, and they were used to this lavish lifestyle. So the family of Eric and Lyle Menendez, they didn't think that it was odd at all that they seemed to be going on this spending spree. So law enforcement was looking into Eric and Lyle, but they just weren't putting the pieces together. Now, during this time, Eric and Lyle had began talking to therapists, and over time, they began sharing some of the details of their parents' death with their therapists. Eric was going in depth about his involvement, along with Lyle's involvement, in how their parents' lives were taken, and indirectly confessing that him and Lyle had been a part of the crime that took place against his mom and dad. Now, Eric's therapist had a girlfriend, and he was telling this girlfriend what Eric Menendez was telling him in these sessions. Eventually, Eric's therapist and his girlfriend broke up. And when they did, his girlfriend went to law enforcement, and she told law enforcement that Eric and Lyle Menendez were involved in the death of their parents. Now, Lyle was arrested immediately, and Eric, he turned himself in a few days later after he returned from a trip to Israel. So now the Menendez brothers were in custody, and they were being charged with the death of their parents, Jose and Kitty Menendez. When they were questioned about why they would commit such a brutal crime against their mom and dad, they began to tell a story. They began to talk about their lives of abuse. According to Eric and Lyle Menendez, their father, Jose Menendez, had been abusing them for years, physically, mentally, as well as SA. They also said that Kitty, their mom, was well aware of this abuse and that sometimes she instigated the abuse. They said that she knew exactly what was going on between Jose Menendez and his sons. And they also said that she had no plans to do anything about it. They felt hopeless. Eric and Lyle told investigators that their father had told them that if they ever talked about any of this abuse, that he would take their life. And it was this statement that prompted them to begin planning to take the life of Jose and Kitty, their parents. They were basically acting in self-defense. They were in fear for their lives, according to Eric and Lyle. Now, as I said, Jose Menendez was a very well-known individual in Southern California. A lot of people knew who he was. He was very powerful in the music industry. So there was some doubt about whether the abuse was true or whether Eric and Lyle were just trying to get their father's money. And this is the direction that the prosecution would go in trying to prosecute Eric and Lyle. So the defense was basically saying that Eric and Lyle had been abused since they were children, and this abuse had gone on for years and years. They said that Jose Menendez, in addition to the abuse, was very overbearing. He was very hard on his sons. And the prosecution argued that these were all fabricated stories, that there was no history of their dad ever abusing them in the ways that they were claiming. So the prosecution was basically calling Eric and Lyle liars and basically saying that they took the lives of their parents because they were greedy. All of Southern California was following this story. And when Eric and Lyle went on trial, it was one of the very first trials that was ever televised. So people got to watch this and they got to see the details of these crimes. Now, when this trial was over, it ended in a hung jury. So when they retried Eric and Lyle Menendez, they omitted a lot of the evidence that was presented in the first trial. This trial was also not televised, and they were found guilty. They were both found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. So Eric and Lyle were entering the California prison system. Now, here we are, 35 years after Eric and Lyle Menendez have been locked up. And now there's new information. New information has come forward that could prove that Eric and Lyle Menendez were in fact abused their entire lives by their father, as well as their mother. So now they're going back into this case. And that's why we're talking about this. After 35 years, we all thought that Eric and Lyle Menendez, they had locked him up and thrown away the key. But now there's new updates, and I want to talk about those new updates. A letter has resurfaced that the brothers had written in 1988 to a family member detailing the abuse that Eric and Lyle were suffering at the hands of their mom and dad. This letter has just resurfaced. In addition to the member of a hugely popular boy band, Menudo, coming out and claiming that he was the victim of SA from Jose Menendez at their mansion in Beverly Hills when Menudo was signed to RCA Records, where Jose was a top executive. So all of this information is now coming out that could prove that Eric and Lyle Menendez were in fear for their lives, and they did believe that this abuse would continue to happen. So a Los Angeles DA has recommended, due to this new information, that Eric and Lyle possibly be resentenced. They could possibly go home. A judge agrees with this DA and has basically started the process to parole Eric and Lyle Menendez. Now, this isn't something that would just happen overnight. Obviously, Eric and Lyle would have to do a psychological evaluation. They've been locked up for 35 years in the California prison system, so they're basically institutionalized at this point. They went in when they were 18 and 21 years old. Now they're in their 50s, so they'll have to do a psychological evaluation. At that point, the parole board will decide whether Eric and Lyle can go home. So what do you think? Do you feel that Eric and Lyle Menendez have been in prison long enough? They've been locked up for 35 years, but they did take their parents' lives in a very brutal manner. Now, because of this new information that could possibly prove what they were saying all along, that they were victims of abuse, that might change things a little bit. So what do you all think? Do you think that Eric and Lyle Menendez should have to serve out their sentence of life without parole? Or do you think that they've done enough time, that they've paid the price for brutally taking the lives of Jose and Kitty Menendez. Let me know what you think in the comments. And thanks for hanging out with me today. I really do appreciate it. And if you liked my video, please hit the like button and consider subscribing to my channel. I hope that y'all had a great day, and we'll see you next time.